Well, welcome to the interview series. Murad Al-Katib. Murad is the CEO of AGT Food and Ingredients here in Regina, and we're happy to have him here with us today. So, welcome to the interview series, Murad. You're the first interview that we've done in this series, and why don't you go ahead and tell us a bit about yourself, about your background, where you grew up, and how you got started.
Well, great. Well, thanks, Brad, for having me, and certainly my pleasure as now an honorary doctorate holder from the University of Regina.
Hmm.
So, great
I
to
didn't know that. Congratulations.
absolutely. So great to be here. Talking a bit about our sector and about myself. So just to start, I think what I like to do is just kind of relate a bit of my background. So, I am a first generation Canadian, born and raised in a small rural community called Davidson. So the midpoint between Saskatoon and Regina. And I like to kind of relate that my passion for agriculture certainly came from my rural upbringing. And my father immigrated to Canada from Turkey in 1965. My mother came shortly thereafter as a young bride, and became the first woman immigrant to be elected to a rural municipal council.
Hmm.
And so, growing up in our house, my father as the country doctor, my mother as a RM counselor, town counselor, and the mayor of Davidson, jobs on Main Street and the importance of agriculture were paramount discussions at our dinner table.
For sure.
I was able to see in the 1980s, the transformation from wooden grain elevators to concrete grain terminals, and how the grain handling industry, really transitioned. And we were lucky and fortunate in Davidson that two terminals located to our
Hmm.
community. And so, we are a center of agriculture. And I think that really was part of the passion that brought me, into the sector. So finished high school, went to the University of Saskatchewan, did a commerce degree, went down to the United States, to the Thunderbird School of Global Management in Arizona, and then ended up back here, after a stint in Washington, D.C., working for the Canadian government. And, I've spent my career now working on international trade, both in government for the first 6 years, and then founding a little company called Saskatchewan Pulse, which became AGT. And, the vision was very simply, can we take the crops grown in Saskatchewan? My focus was particularly the pulse crops, lentils, peas, chickpeas, and beans. Could we add value to them? Could we capture that value here? And could we build a global multinational based out of Regina? And I'm happy to say we were able to do that, as we're about 2 billion in revenue now and operations in 5 continents.
So tell us a little bit more about the trajectory of the company. I think I remember you talking about starting it in your basement. I think I've heard you talk about that before. And when you're maybe your kids were small, and your kids and my kids have gone to school together, and so they're roughly at the same age, and so I know them a little bit. But talk to us about the trajectory of the business from that startup that you started in the basement to what it is today.
Well, I still remember going to my wife, Michelle. Her and I met at the College of Commerce at the U of S. So she's a business graduate as well. And I came home and I said, honey, you're 6 months pregnant with our twins. I'm going to quit my job in government. That was a very, very high paying job. And I'm going to start a lentil manufacturing company. And, she looked like I'd said to her, hey, let's run away and join the circus. And it was a tense few days of worry for her, but I did. I took that blank sheet of paper and I wrote what I thought was a very sound business plan, found some investors, and launched the company, just at the time that my twins were born. So 19 years ago. So I had a boy and a girl, Tarek and Sarah, who are both actually at the Hill School in the second year,
Right.
of business now. So, the trajectory was, we started up the plant in Regina. We got the company to about $40 million in revenue. And then I decided, Brad, that we had an opportunity to scale and to, dramatically increase the size and scope of our business by expanding internationally. So I actually took the company public in 2007, did a small public share offering, and then I embarked from 2009 until 2015 on a plan where we did 16 acquisitions in 6 years in 5 continents. We built factories from greenfield, and we increased the revenue by about $300 million a year each and every year for 6 consecutive years. So we took the company from about, 100 million to just under $2 billion in revenue, where we've continued to be over the past number of years. But, certainly a transition now in the business with, factories in Western Canada, in North Dakota, China, Australia, South Africa, and Turkey. And so, very broad scope of activity, including a traditional grain handling business, pulses business, and a really exciting packaged foods and food ingredients business that's really, really growing as the plant-based protein trend continues to gain steam in the world.
So you talked about going public back in the early days. What made you, I'm a little familiar with being public as a public company, and what made you choose to go that route? And what did you see as the positives and negatives of that experience?
Well, look, there's no doubt about it that, I had a great group of investors, a family out of Turkey. We were a small private company with, SaskWorks Venture Fund was involved with us very early on. So, great group of investors. But my vision of growth and the trajectory I wanted to take the company on in terms of speed, we didn't have enough capital on our own. And so, access to capital was really the big opportunity in the public markets was, showing results with the capital that I raised and then being able to raise more capital. That was really, really appealing. The negative, of course, was I always used to say I was the only pulse company in the world that was public. And so, every 3 months, it's like having to stand in front of the whole world and, you have to take all your clothes off and everybody can look at you, but nobody else can see anybody else.
Right.
So it's really, really, I don't want to use the word burden, but it's tough being the only one that's public in a market where there's no futures markets in our commodities. So there's no price discovery. There's no visibility on margins. So, the fact is when we were doing well, farmers would say, well, you're making too much money. When we weren't doing well, farmers were worried about our financial health. Whereas the guy down the street could have been 10 times worse than us, but nobody knew it.
That's right.
Those were the tough parts. But, again, I couldn't have achieved what I achieved without access to the public markets.
And did you find that, as the only company in your space that was public, did that cause you challenges on Bay Street sometimes? Sort of, you didn't have any comparables maybe, or how did you find Bay Street and its understanding of agriculture?
Yeah, this was always a big challenge. Is that it's interesting that the analysts that covered us, we had about 9 investment analysts covering AGT, and one of their complaints was that the company had so many moving parts that it was hard to understand. And yet what we would always try and say is, well, that's because we're a diversified public company. And that should actually be the strength of the public company, is that with multiple business units, we were never in a position, Brad, where we had negative EBITDA. We were always, significantly positive EBITDA. It was just a bit volatile with the cyclicality of commodities. And so, that was always a challenge, was getting people to understand multi-geographies, international, not a hedgeable commodity, and then the value-added processing side. Plant-based protein demand was starting, and we were at the forefront driving the plant-based protein revolution. And, there was an understanding or a desire to understand it, and analysts and institutions wanted us to go faster. But, it wasn't a trend that we could just go faster. We had started it. We had been pushing it. We were working with the food companies to meet the demand of a consumer. That takes time. And so, again, the impatience of capital markets and, the quarter to quarter management, led to a point where our stock went up quite material and it came down quite materially. And so in 2019, I decided to find a financial partner and privatize the company again, take it back, have an opportunity for myself and our management team to own more of the company and structure it again the right way. And maybe one day we'll take it back out public again.
Right. Well, you'll be enjoying walking around with your clothes on for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
So, as you think back over the years of developing the business, what would be the biggest challenge that you faced? Was it with was it financing it? Was it the fact that you're so global? And I know I've seen you mostly in airports over the last 20 years, and I know you're on the road an awful lot. So, but what was the biggest challenge to growing the business?
Yeah, I think I would split that into a few buckets. I mean, certainly just to start from a personal perspective, I was away between 180 and 200 days a year every year in my business career. So, with the exception of this year with COVID, where I've been in Regina or in Saskatchewan for 8 consecutive months, I've never had that in my entire
Yeah,
career. So,
yeah,
I missed a lot in terms of kids growing up and that. And I always say as an entrepreneur running a multinational, you have to make sacrifices. You have to decide that, for me, it was my family and my business, and what that sacrifices is a lot of time for other things like friends and hobbies and other things. But that's what you live for.
right. Yeah,
Challenges for us really, Brad, were macroeconomic in nature. I mean, we went through a period from 2007 to, let's say, 2017, where if you look at it, you had the U.S. debt crisis, so the 2017 meltdown. You had the 2011 European debt crisis. The Middle East region was a very important region, continues to be for us. Arab Spring, which was a
right.
generational political change where, Mubarak and Gaddafi and regimes that were, ingrained dictatorships fell. These were very difficult times, along with the, commodity super cycle of 2017 and 18, or 2018,
Right.
2019. But these were all very challenging, events, when I look at existing as a global multinational, and local currency devaluations, risk management. Those were all very important parts. And I want to add one more thing. Growing through acquisition is a great, fast way to grow, but it presents tremendous challenges in terms of building a corporate culture.
Hmm.
So, we kept all the management teams. 15 of the 16 management teams were retained. Only the very first one on the reverse takeover that we did as a public company, where the management team didn't stay with
Right.
us,
Yeah.
which is pretty predictable. But, beyond that, it was take the best of the people, the best of what they do, and then try and provide a corporate infrastructure. But over time, you got to create a corporate culture.
Hmm.
And that was a big challenge. It's a challenge that we continue to have today.
Sure.
But I think we're making good headway.
And you're not just dealing across geography, but across cultures and languages and lots of tradition in lots of those places too, aren't you?
Absolutely. I mean, those are things that, again, we are a multinational, multicultural company, and understanding religions and traditions and the way of life in many of these
Hmm.
geographies. We can't come as North Americans and impose our way as the best way to do things.
Right.
I think that's really an important distinction that you have to
Yeah.
have.
So let's talk for a moment about Saskatchewan. You started here. Sometimes people complain that we're kind of at the end of the road. It does feel that way sometimes, flying to overseas and coming back and spending that extra time in airports waiting for that last flight home. But what did you find? What would be the we'll have students watching this who are thinking about their careers and, do I start my career here in the province, or do I do it somewhere else, or can I build my career here? And obviously you've done that. You've built a big company and done that from here. But talk for a minute about how Saskatchewan and the things that are Saskatchewan built into your success, and then give us maybe one of the negatives too.
Well, I think that, listen, as a young person, I mean, I went down, as I said, to the US, and, when I finished my MBA at Thunderbird School of Management, it was the number one ranked international business program in the United States. So we were ahead of Harvard and Wharton and Columbia. And, so I had Fortune 100 companies recruiting on campus. And when I left, I never expected to come back, but I had what I called the big fish, little fish dilemma. And, the big fish, little fish was I wanted to be a big fish in the big pond, which was the global, international
Right.
marketplace. And, what I decided was that if I became a big fish in a little pond first, I could jump to the big pond. And that's why I came back to Saskatchewan. And, remember talking to, graduates that I went to school with, Mark Smuckers, who's the, the current, heir of the Smuckers Jam and Jelly empire, was my classmate. And these guys were like, you're going back where?
Where? Yeah.
Saskatchewan? Why? But my view was I could do things here that I wouldn't have a chance to do in other jurisdictions working for companies that I worked for here. And we are so international in terms of our economy that, we're more trade dependent in Saskatchewan than any other jurisdiction in Canada. And Canada is the most export dependent nation in the G7. So that makes us one of the most export dependent international jurisdictions and most successful jurisdictions in the world. And I want people, the students to be thinking that, today agriculture isn't what it used to be. I mean, we look at digitization of agriculture, the use of data analytics, drones, satellite imagery, predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, automation, right? That's agriculture 2.0.
Yeah.
This is a technology business. Plant-based protein and value-added production is going to make Canada and Saskatchewan the first stop on the protein highway. Renewable fuels, where canola will be used with hydrogen systems for, a true replacement for diesel and jet fuel in the decarbonization of the transportation industry, is a reality that we're going to see in the next decade. Now, these are all incredibly exciting things when we look at agriculture. Now we look at, the mining sector, uranium, potash. We look at the oil and gas sector. We look at the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Regina with Audacity YQR, an initiative that I, helped along with some others to put together. And you realize that, my decision to come back, showed that I could reach international markets from Saskatchewan, that I could have the freight and logistics to succeed internationally. And, in 2017, I was the World Entrepreneur of the Year. I beat Bill Marriott Jr., the founder of the Marriott Hotel Empire. He was competing with me that year. So, you can do it here. And I guess we're evidence of that. And that's one of the biggest positives of starting and succeeding in this company, is that a small town Saskatchewan boy built his company. We're globally significant today. We're still here, and we're still planning to continue to grow from 2 billion to 5 billion.
Do you think that you had any kind of advantage, given the fact that you were a first generation immigrant kid? Did that give you I didn't grow up in Saskatchewan. I grew up in Ontario. I was born in Toronto and moved here as an adult. And there are times where I feel like that was a great advantage, in that I didn't quite look at everything the same way that everybody else did. I just had a slightly different take on what I saw around me. And I've like you, I've enjoyed the sort of bigger fish, small pond kind of aspect in Saskatchewan. It's a very flat society. You can really get to know anybody, and people really want to get behind you and help you if you ask nicely. And that's been a great benefit to me. But
I think that
do you think there's some truth in that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, listen, I always say that my parents did the best for us. They raised us as Canadians, but they raised us knowing that there was a world outside of Saskatchewan that was important for us to link to, whether it be culturally. My mother taught me to speak Turkish growing up in Davidson. I mean, who would have thought I would own a business today that has $500 million in revenue, and I'm able to walk, my 950 employees, on my factory floors in Turkey and speak to them in Turkish, right? That has been materially significant for my career.
Yeah.
And, from that perspective, I think that global vision, is one that certainly benefited me, and it certainly brought a cultural awareness to my doing business around the world. And, I did enjoy the benefit of people internationally seeing me as a citizen internationally. And yet, the farmer in Rosetown, who said to me, when I met him, God, you speak English well. But then realizing that he realized I grew up in Davidson, Saskatchewan, in the hospital, born there, and I graduated from the school there, and my English was because of my grade 12 English teacher. I was a home, grown person at the same time, and that, I enjoyed the benefits on both sides, Brad. And I think that that's something that that others will enjoy. I want to make one more point about accessibility. You are absolutely right. In Saskatchewan, people get behind successful companies and entrepreneurs. You know, you have access to mentors, to investors, to political decision makers like you have in no other jurisdiction, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's so true, and it's not often you can go to the grocery store and you run into the minister of highways. Or I was out at the lake recently, and it was during the provincial election campaign, and the minister of health showed up just to make sure I was chainsawing all my wood properly. So you know it's a neat place for that, because you could not experience that kind of access in any of the other places that I've lived in the world or in Canada. It's a pretty unique part of the culture, and I think it really it tapped into correctly. And if a young person's looking at this and saying, how do I don't know anybody. Well, it's really just a matter of asking, because people really do want to help and get behind you and help you succeed right here.
Yeah,
So
and
true.
I think it's important to get involved. I mean, as you're studying, you got to recognize that employers are looking for things that will differentiate, you
Mhm.
as a student. So, whether it be, getting involved in JDC West, or getting involved in more of the case competitions, community causes, all of those things are noble efforts that build your resume to differentiate you from every other resume that we're looking at.
Right.
Whether it be athletics is another one. I mean, we have a tremendous amount of successful athletic, folks that are working in our company today, because we see good education, student athletes who have succeeded, with the demands of education as well as sport. Same thing goes with those that have, tremendous backgrounds on volunteering, because it just shows that you can do more than just open your book and study.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
That's right. And if I think back to a year and a half ago, when our underwriting team was at its peak, most of them had some tie to the U of R track team. And you hire one good one, and then you don't advertise anymore. You just say who are the best other people that you graduated with. And
Exactly. You just go to the network. There's a lot
yeah,
of,
that's right.
yeah.
What one piece of advice would you offer to the business schools at the U of R as it relates to agribusiness? You've hired students who've come through the U of R. Is there anything that the university could do that would help, expand its program or make itself more relevant in this space? Yeah, obviously, one of the things that, even when I took on this role as executive in residence in agribusiness, one of my first questions to the university was, well, I know there's an ag school up the road there in Saskatoon. How do you want to play in this space? And so, what advice would you have for the schools at the U of R?
Well, I think that, our place is really to look at, the entrepreneurship side of agriculture. And, that's an area where I know, the dean of the business school and others have been looking. And I think that, we have a case method teaching program at the Hill School and the Levene School. And, what I have seen over the years is, more and more cases that have an agricultural focus or an agricultural connection. And, it's surprising to me how much I just hear from my own kids now, of course, being in classes that, they have to roll their eyes and say, Dad, we talked about you and AGT again in one of our classes. And, so I like that connection, Brad. I think it's direct, relevant context for the classes that people are taking. And I think that's the advantage, is the case method gives us an ability to incorporate content that's truly world relevant. And I think that that's what prepares graduates. So, that and the co-op program are two things that I think have to have, more concentration and, more connection, with agribusinesses that are willing to bring in co-op students, test drive them, train them. I mean, we don't just look at it as a test drive. We actually look at co-op terms as an ability to test drive, but also to train.
Yes.
So, when we end up with somebody that we really like, when they come in after they're done, there's no worry and wait.
Yeah, they're off and running.
Exactly. We have a couple of U of R graduates that have come in, in the last couple of years, one is actually running a business for us already, and he's only 24 years old.
Oh, good for
He
him.
came in and he's done incredibly well. He's been with us on and off for 3 years, so it's been good.
That's great. So, our time is running out, but I always like this kind of question. If you could go back in time to, when you were a student, and give yourself advice based on everything that you know today, what would it be? Given all your learnings over the years, building the business, working in government, doing the various things that you've done?
Take more accounting classes. That would be something that I wouldn't have expected. But, my background in particular, that I actually recognized later on in my undergrad. So I did finance first, but my MBA, I focused almost entirely on corporate financial reporting. And, Brad, I chose an area which was, the restatement of foreign financial statements to US GAAP.
Okay.
So it sounds really uninteresting, but if you think of all the emerging markets, mergers and acquisitions, and work I've done on buying businesses, the ability to build a proper cash flow and understand whether a company's making or losing money, that is absolutely critical. So whether you think you're a marketing person or you're a HR person or you're in finance, you have to be able to understand a P&L. Profit and loss, cash flows are absolutely critical. So that's one really strong piece of advice I would give students is make sure you take those classes and make sure you realize how relevant they're going to be compared to some of the other things that you take.
Right. Well, that's good advice. I'd echo that. I'm the CFO of Input Capital, and my account. I don't have an accounting background, and I've learned it on the job, and I learned it a lot before I had this job. But accounting is definitely an area where you can almost never know too much. Although there are days where I'm happy to know that it's the accountants who are going to do the work, and I focus on the bigger picture of running the finance end of the enterprise.
Well, and I think that's my point, is that just because you're very strong in accounting doesn't mean you're going to be an accountant.
Right. That's right. And there's so many other ways to put that to work.
Leaders are actually strong in accounting.
Yes.
So from that perspective, that's the advice I've given. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any other final thoughts you'd like to share with us before we wrap up?
No, I think that the one thing that I would say is have passion for what you do. Agriculture is an incredibly exciting opportunity, and some say that this is a century for agriculture, and I think it's a century for Canada, and I think it's a century for Saskatchewan. And so from that perspective, hang on, it's going to be a wild 20 years ahead, as agriculture takes advantage of this plant-based protein, renewable fuels, and the digitization of agriculture. I think that we are going to build tens of billions of dollars of new wealth in our country. And I wish I was again back in my 20s starting over again, like the students are going to be. So Take the opportunity, ride, and it's going to be a wild one, so hang on.
Well, those are great thoughts to end with, and thanks for taking the time today. On behalf of the students and the faculty at the Levene and Hill Schools of Business, I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. I think COVID may have helped because we could find you in the right time zone, and like everybody, none of us have been going anywhere these days. So thank you very much for taking the time, and we'll look forward to seeing you around town.
Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks.